Well, thank you very much for joining me and Matt for this session on building a united talent experience. It's very much centering on how do we build a skill strategy for the exponential age that we live in. And what I mean by that is that we're living in a world which is moving at quite a crazy pace, and it's only getting more rapid, more uncertain. And yet, as organizations or people who support people in organizations, how do we cope with that? How do we help people cope with that rapid change? And what sort of skills are required, and what sort of mix of learning and relearning and systems and support and workflows are required to actually achieve that successfully? So I'm going to center on what I believe and what we believe here at Totara is that there needs to be a much more unified and aligned approach to how we do support people when they are at work, so that they can do their best work wherever they may be. And as we know, as we are doing today, we're all spread out around the world. Most of our work increasingly is spread out outside of what used to be the more normal office environments or other places of work, which are clearly still important, factories, retail, etc. But there's much more flexibility and mobility in how and where and what we do when we're at work. So this session is very much to sort of try and give us some thoughts about that and some solutions and directions on how we go about that. So let's start with a little bit of an anecdote. So as you will remember, back in, I think it was October, beginning of October, Elon Musk took ownership of Twitter, and essentially I was quite amused, but also I thought it was worth pointing out this little tweet interaction that Elon Musk actually triggered on Twitter. So when he took over at Twitter, he received a notification from the learning management system at Twitter, and he made a wry comment or a sarcastic comment about it. So he was invited to start managing at Twitter 101 when he first joined, and he was given 30 days to complete that mandatory course before he then gets enrolled onto managing Twitter 201. So he posted this up on Twitter, and then he made the comment about, well, it's really demanding, to have a mere 30 days to learn this priceless information. And then what a tantalizing carrot management 201 is. So if you remember, this is back in the early days before he proceeded to fire essentially most of the staff at Twitter, and you'll have seen in the news a lot of stories about the management approach that's been applied. So maybe he should have been paying attention to Management 101 and Management 201 for that matter. But it's interesting because essentially he was responding in a way that I think a lot of people do to notifications that flow through the normal work day experience. For anyone who's using technology on a regular basis, I think you'll agree that our inboxes can feel pretty overwhelming, and that the frequency of notifications that flow through is far higher than we can probably assimilate and cope with. The correct level is that's manageable depending on the devices that you use, where you're using them, and in fact where you are when you receive these notifications is quite critical to the context and your ability to respond effectively. So in many cases, this is genuinely overwhelming, and not least when it comes to the support we are trying to do as learning professionals and HR professionals supporting people across an organization. We're not quite realizing that uncoordinated messaging is what we're delivering, that this can actually have the opposite of the intended effect. So there's lots of good intentions in reaching out to people with notifications to do training, etc. But we may well be training people to ignore us because these notifications flow through and we become numb to them. We may even become stressed by them. And in fact, there's growing bodies of evidence that if we don't manage the flow of demand on people, or perceived demand on people, we can actually be causing actual harm to mental health and well-being. And that's been rising as on a strategic agenda going forward in terms of organizations being able to support people effectively. and how do you harness this sort of tsunami of notifications effectively, and how do you handle that? Well, one of the root causes is in fact very much within our own domain. If we're within the HR and learning functions itself, is that of organizations of a certain size, you typically separate out into different teams, and there's a sort of an unspoken competition really in terms of the demand for attention. So if you're in learning and development, you'll be focused very much on driving awareness and completion of learning activities. You may be in internal comms, you may be looking at engagement and satisfaction across the organization. That tends to include lots of surveys and check-ins and nudges, plus also performance management, more formal processes, plus also check-ins and the day-to-day priorities that management will have on their team members, plus also the sort of parachuting in big initiatives that come through from the leadership team can also come and overwhelm and compete for attention across the board. So as a result, we end up with a workplace experience that's frustrating at best, obstructive at worst, and it really isn't as supportive as it should be. And we need to recognize that the workflows, the processes, the tools, the way in which we organize ourselves is really impacting that negatively at present. So what I like to do is put forward a more positive vision, I think, for how we should be managing the employee experience of people at work. So we call it the talent experience. So this is essentially the activities that you do when you are at work or when you're onboarding and coming into a workplace. How do we help people maintain, build, grow their skills, apply their skills effectively? So this little cycle that I put up on the screen here, ask yourself the question in your own organization whether each of those teal colored dots that you see there, whether you can say yes to each of those steps, which if you are able to say yes to that, well done. But let's go through them. Essentially, do you think that you have access to the right resources to do your job, the right tools, the systems? Do you know how to use them effectively? That's often a challenge in its own right for people, especially when they're onboarding. Do you receive praise or feedback, both constructive and recognition for the work that you do on a timely basis? Do you actually know what you should be doing in terms of the goals that you're working towards, and in terms of managing or working to a performance, being measured on performance? Are you clear about that, both from a company level through to the team, department team, and then down to the individuals themselves in terms of the objectives they're looking to meet? And can you say yes that you have access to the right skills opportunities or building up new skills? This can be skills that are absolutely necessary to the role that you're playing in the organization and how you interact with others, but then also opportunities to self-develop and grow in the organization. Can you have access to that readily in the organization that you work with? And is the company management culture suitably supportive in terms of it? Is it more like a coach mentor model where you feel being valued and listened to, or is it much more of a command and control and demanding what you do and what you should do? There are obviously very different styles out there, but it's more evidence that the more supportive you can be, the more likely that your people are going to be feeling that they are performing well, they're motivated, they feel part of a cohesive team that does work together. And if we think about it, fundamentally, organizations are teamwork. It's about how we work together effectively to get things done that we couldn't do unilaterally on our own. And we have the added dimension now of working at a distance or in hybrid fashions. So we need to find better ways in which we can move towards this positive cycle here, a unified talent experience. So another way of looking at this is that you have a talent cycle, and many organizations, when they review their current people base, but also how they're trying to bring people into the organization, there can be real challenges in that if you are misaligned, and if you do have this environment of heavy misaligned notifications, then you end up on this rather perilous talent cycle. So you may bring people into the business, so you're hiring, but you can quickly lead to disengagement. There can be a loss of alignment. You're not getting the performance that you anticipated. People aren't able to perform at the levels they need. And as a result, they may just leave. And increasingly, that mobility in the main has been growing. People have been choosing to reevaluate their working environments and how they would like to operate. And so there's much more opportunity to move between organizations. And that creates more competition for good talent going forward. So as an organization as a whole, you want to be off this perilous talent cycle and much more into this virtuous talent cycle here, where people do feel immediately aligned to the organization, to people around them. They know what they're doing. They're on that unified talent experience track, and that they're being developed. They're getting good feedback on their performance in a timely fashion, and they have opportunities to grow and advance in the organization. And that will lead to, more likely than not, good retention, and that cycle can continue. And most organizations that operate at this level are much more likely to be successful, competitive, successful, and growing in their respective markets and activities that they do. So this is all in an environment where the world is moving at pace and technology is having huge impact to this. And I'm going to give you a book recommendation here from an author called Azim Azhar. He's based in the UK, but has spent quite a considerable amount of time in investigating the drivers behind these changes. Now, there's technology, clearly. There's also what impact that has on us as individuals, but also in business and organizations, but also the societal impact and political impact that has. So it's sort of intertwined. Very good book in unpicking what is the key drivers. And so please do get in touch. I'm able to get easy access to this book, having links with the author, but I would strongly recommend a good read of that when you have the opportunity. Now, one of the key aspects here, and this has been something I've been talking about for quite a while now in terms of the impact of exponential change, but each month almost that goes by, we're seeing even more sort of impact in this. And just the current debate about ChatGPT as a tool, that's an AI tool that people can use. I'm sure, please get in the chat if you can say in this chat whether you've already used GPT to support you or tested it out and to see how it's working. Many people have been experimenting with it. Many people are thinking and now realizing the impact of more intelligent systems and AI support that's out there. So this is impacting all sectors. It doesn't matter what sector you're operating in, whether it's literally mining or physical type of work, through to much more knowledge work, such as the legal profession. Well, that is really ripe for radical change. It's not changed at the pace that other sectors have, not least because they're good at defending their territory and keeping the norms there. But that's going to change significantly and become much more automated. But it's not just that. Even coding, developing software will also be impacted by smarter tools to really massively improve productivity. Even influencers. I've used this example in previous talks, where if you think about job roles, new job roles emerging, well, being an influencer is a job role. It's sort of emerged into one. A good friend of mine's daughter is a very successful influencer, which is fantastic. But there's many others who are, they're sort of struggling around the edges to achieve that. But it's an aspiration. More people are involved in it. But what's remarkable is that even before the recent advent of the new AI tools that have come on stream, such as DALL-E and ChatGPT and others, is that over in South Korea, there's been virtual influencers around for a number of years. You know, they're video based, they sing, they dance, they do all sorts of things, but they're not real. You know, they're not human. They have been representing brands and building revenue streams off of the back of a completely virtual personality. So that's just now going mainstream. So you can now envisage that if you're a brand, then you'll be adopting a more AI virtual influencer track sooner rather than later, and that sort of puts probably an end point to a job role of an influencer, maybe 5 years hence. So things change rapidly. So job roles arise, they also shrink away. Brand new one out. You know, if you can use ChatGPT effectively, if you can use DALL-E and create images or even videos, prompting the tools effectively, well, that's a great job role. You know, you're in demand if you can do that well. So this half-life of job roles is shrinking. It's less than 7 years already, and it's going to be even less. So this just puts more and more emphasis on the ability to learn, relearn, and the whole pressure around skills and upskilling. And that skills mix is changing rapidly. There's been a couple of research reports that have really pointing this out, both in terms of the general skills mix moving towards more analytical thinking, complex problem solving, sort of cognitive, non-routine cognitive roles, plus also on a communication level and collaboration level, the interaction between humans, more sophisticated communication, if you like, between us, being able to communicate at a distance and collaborate at distance is valued even more. Equally, because of the pace at which these and the uncertainty that's just apparent in the environments that we're working in, being resilient, you know, resistant to stress, or having good tolerance levels, positive stress ideally, and being flexible is increasingly important. How do we help people adopt that sort of mix and be able to work with smart technology more effectively and productively? And you can see that just over the decades, how this trend has been manifesting itself, that more and more job roles will become non-routine cognitive. So working alongside smart technology and smart people, and dealing with different problems that change. There's a lot of variety and divergence there, away from the more routine cognitive, routine manual type work, because ultimately that's much more easy to automate. So what this means in terms of organizational structure is that your organization needs to be less brittle. You know, so we've invested a lot as we get bigger as organizations in processes, in work practices. But if they're not flexible and adaptable, then there's a risk of breaking. And as a result of that, you won't respond well to the current environment that we're in. And you can see that in the examples of organizations that have really suffered in the face of uncertainty. They've literally, you know, gone bust. And others have thrived, and where they have thrived, they've a much more flexible culture. I like to put it that they're a bit more like a jazz ensemble than they are a classical orchestra. If you think about that, classical orchestra follows a score, and they have standard operating procedures, if you like, and they also follow a conductor, a leadership that's very directive, and they respond accordingly. There's not much variance from that score. In fact, that would be frowned upon. Whereas if you think about a jazz troupe, well, it's built into the architecture of the way they work together, the teamwork, is that different players take the lead. You know, there's an expectation of divergence, of creative expression, and working around and dealing with uncertainty in real time. So if you think of it in those ways, you know, your organization needs to start adopting those type of teamwork criteria and manifestations to be more responsive and adaptable to the world in which we're around. So look, in the chat, it'd be very interesting, you know, to see what you think your organization is like. Are you more jazz, or are you more classical still? And clearly there's going to be a mix of the two as you grow and as you scale. You need a skeleton on which to sort of stand taller. But we do, in order to face up to the challenges ahead, to be much more flexible than we are and adaptable. Now, this rather complicated slide, and we'll be sharing these in the community, Totara community afterwards, so you can look at it in more detail at a later point. But essentially, we need to be much more focused on how we design our organization and think of it as a skills-based organization. Now, that's a simple way to put it. We've always had skills in organizations, perhaps we've called them competencies. There are slightly different definitions around that, but what we're really saying is that there needs to be some fluidity to the structures in there. Now, this architecture that you're looking at on the screen now has been worked up through Deloitte. Deloitte are actually one of our partners, but they're advocating that in order to be adaptable and have an adaptable response to the working and economic environment around you, that you need these fluid structures. You need to think more in terms of the individual skills and the skills mixes, rather than sort of chunkier job role categories. And that you need to think much more about bringing together all of the, and aligning the support mechanisms that you provide for people when they are at work, in order for them to do their best work. So this will lead to designing skills hubs, so being able to understand what the skills mix is in your organization, that you think broader and even outside of your organization as to how work gets done, because it's much more porous than it used to be. Work gets done not just by employees, but freelancers, partners, even your own customers get involved with creating value for you. So it's a much more fluid environment, and it requires a different approach. And it also requires new technology as an infrastructure to enable this. So rather than it being separate systems that don't necessarily talk well to each other, they're much more integrated. And that this is what will enable that more unified experience for each and more personalized experience for each individual worker. Now, if you do achieve this, some of the evidence has been gathered by Deloitte to indicate that if you have these characteristics of a skills-based organization, you're far more likely to be able to place your talent in more effective roles. You know, they'll be able to exercise their skills more accurately, which should be motivating for them, but it's much more effective in terms of the outcomes that you achieve. You will retain high performers more likely, because they're not going to be frustrated and obstructed. That you're not just going to be reactive, you're going to be able to anticipate change and respond efficiently and effectively to it. And that puts you ahead of your competition quite significantly. And it also basically means that you can develop essentially a workplace culture and a workforce experience that is positive, and that gives you the opportunity to sustain that over the longer term, resulting in the retention, etc., that I've already just discussed. Essentially, bringing all of that together builds a reputation out in the world that you're a great place to grow and to develop. So any one individual out there will be wanting to come and work for your organization as a result. And when you look at surveys, one of the top items for job seekers and more people in the workplace is opportunities to grow and develop. There's already an innate recognition that they need access to new skills, but what we need to be very careful and mindful about is what that experience is like. It can't be old-fashioned, irrelevant training that is abstract and not applicable, very readily applied to their work. It needs to be very consumable. It needs to be in the flow of what they're doing. It needs to be filled with feedback and collaborative opportunities so that they can demonstrate that they've got these skills and have acquired them. All of this absolutely demands a much more inclusive environment, and you need to draw on the diversity of your people and build a diverse way of thinking, essentially, to be able to respond to all of these uncertain, unexpected events that will undoubtedly occur. Which also leads to better quality innovation, much more creative responses to problems and more creative ideas that can help you differentiate going forward. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not doing what is essentially essential administrative functions, such as certifying that people have the right compliance levels and skills levels to do certain roles and jobs, that there is formal feedback in place and assessment, that there's clear ways to be able to report and measure proficiency levels. And there are different tools in the mix that enable this to work efficiently, and that's very much the core of what Totara is able to offer, as well as the more fluid, aligned and unified experience that I'm talking about. But essentially, we're going to see more sort of smarter tools coming in, AI really coming into that experience, that will be able to accelerate our analysis of what workers are doing on an everyday basis, and to then give much more customized and adaptive and personalized support, plus also being able to really understand what the skills mix is now for your organization, and be able to help identify what support's required to move your whole organization through to the future skills mix, or that you need to be remaining competitive. So all of that is becoming increasingly important, to be able to work at the pace and to be much more adaptable and resilient in the face of all of these change that I referenced. So we are really reframing how we support people at work. It can't be the traditional approach. It has to be much more fluid and aligned to individual needs. So we're very much about building skills, but it's about cultivating capabilities. It is about skills development, but it's also about opening up the opportunity for workers to express their interest in and develop, and to actually expose skills that you may not even know they have, which could be of value to them and to you and the organization. That learning is seen as just part of work. It's part of the flow of work. It's not something you just do outside of your job, which is still very much a common experience. And that it's about rewarding development and rewarding and recognizing talent, and being able to support that, retain it in your organization for the longer term. That will lead to wholesale benefits for the company and as a whole. So this really leads me to the technology that we now have available to us, particularly here at Totara and our Totara customers, is to bring these key elements together and to build that unified experience for people. And what we've done is essentially draw on the underlying research that points to what motivates us at work, and that is an opportunity to master new skills. So mastering new skills, it's having a clear idea of the purpose of the organization that you're working for, and how that aligns to your own sense of purpose, plus also the environment in which you are operating in. Is that culture giving you the space to express those skills and to do that? And as I pointed out at the start of this talk, the too often that isn't the case. You're working in an environment where you're not able to utilize the skills that you have. You don't have that autonomy available to you. Now, all of this means that a typical environment where you have separate learning opportunities, you have separate performance management activities and feedback, and you have separate collaborative tools and spaces, is that it becomes disjointed, it becomes problematic. And we just see that when we're trying to work and operate at pace and at distance from each other. So by bringing all of these together onto a single platform, enables you to be much more focused on outcomes. So this idea of all the learning and development support that we do should be very much action oriented, arranged around goals, company goals, team goals, individual goals, and that there's an opportunity to really focus on achieving those goals. So by being able to access learning for those who need it, being able to access expertise and experience in others in the organization very readily adds to that learning experience. Being able to exercise and deliberately practice those new skills and use that knowledge and get immediate feedback is all part of just really rapidly accelerating that skills development experience for people. It becomes much more motivating as a result. Not only that, it becomes much more successful in delivering outcomes for the individual, the team, the organization as a whole. So some of you may have heard of action learning. It is a term that does try and build a framework or a model around how to achieve that, and there's more information actually on our community about this. But essentially, designing your learning experiences with this broad model in place dramatically shifts the focus onto outcomes, which is where it should be, rather than the delivery and consumption of just content. So just to round off, essentially the Totara Talent Experience platform delivers that unified experience. It really works with you to change the way in which the HR function operates and interacts with each other. It breaks down internal silos, encourages that positive way of working and aligning the way in which the support you offer people. It becomes much more successful, that you are personalizing that learning and performance support experience for people. You know, it's relevant to them at the point in time they need it, and that overall you're promoting that virtuous talent cycle. You're staying on that loop. That means you're going to keep good people. You're going to keep developing those good people to be better in their roles, and that means you're also going to be able to adapt to these radically changing times. A lot of organizations are using us across the world in all different sectors, as I say. None of us are you know, not going to be affected by these things. So it's very much worth looking at how you do adopt these in your own sectors. But just as a reminder, and just to finish off, I've already talked about the Exponential Age book. Please do take a look at that. I recommend it. But also the Next Rules of Work by Gary A. Bollers. He's written what is a bit of a blueprint really for how an HR function overall could be structured or should be structured to better suit the world in which we're now living in. So the combination of the two, I think, gives you a really good foundation in how to think about what you would do in your own organization and apply this effectively. So yeah, please do get in touch if you'd like more detail on that. So I'm just going to finish up now and say thanks for listening. It's 4:30, and Matt, I mean, it'd be good to take some questions if there are any from the audience.
Hello. Yeah, I've just posted in the chat to say thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. And if you do have any questions, feel free to put that in the chat now or in the Q&A. But also, if you need some time to reflect on the presentation today, you can come into the Totara community, and in the webinars on demand section, you can ask some questions in there and we can get back to you. You can also @tag Lars, for example, and be able to reflect on the ideas that have been presented today. So yeah, if no one's got any questions right now, we could always come back to them.
Oh, absolutely. There's probably a bit to take in there, but I just wondered if this did resonate with you. If it has, it'd be good to, you know, catch up with or to capture that feedback, as Matt says, in the community. It's a great space to join the conversation and dialogue on these issues. It's great to see actually in the community where we have customers talking with each other, sharing ideas on how they can get the best out of the platform, the Totara platform, one thing, but also exploring, you know, the right techniques and approaches that can really impact it positively in what they're doing with their people. So yeah, it's a good place to come and visit. Good.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Lars, for presenting today. And this webinar will be in the community just after today. So if you do want to share it with any of your colleagues or anyone else, feel free to share the link to the webinar from the community. So thanks everyone for joining today.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy your days and evenings.
A few little comments as well. So Sam saying, this is a great talk. Nice to see what we are doing internally. It's been included in the presentation. It means we can share this more with our partners we host. So it's great to see that that's happening at Catalyst. And Jill's just saying thank you. So thanks to everyone who's joined. And yeah, if you do have further comments as well, please feel free to add those in the community. Thanks, Lars.
Thank you, Matt.